Hey everyone. Did you ever think that a slow year for you would mean that 75% growth over next year? So, to tell us the story about how he could achieve these magnificent numbers is Joe Manganelli. Hi, Joe. Welcome to
Hello.
the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, let's dive right into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Joe. I've found myself pretty deep into the accounting space. I didn't start out as an accountant. I actually went to school for engineering and sort of for a variety of reasons kind of found my way into accounting. And I think how we've gotten in touch is mostly through my work with a company called Calculate. So in 2017, I started a business called Calculate, which is an outsourced fractional accounting and finance service for mostly emerging companies and startups and things like that. So built that up over time, and now working on a software that we spun out of Calculate itself called Amalgam. And so very much ingrained, both having had an accounting firm and working closely with accountants and accounting firms today.
Amazing. Let's speak a little more about Calculate. So, how did you start Calculate? What was your target audience? And how was it that you were able to achieve such high year-on-year growth and high level of customer satisfaction?
Yeah, for sure. So the very beginning of Calculate probably starts with, even though I went to school for engineering, I kind of fell into kind of a corporate finance role. So I worked at Goldman Sachs early in my career, mostly doing kind of corporate finance, budgets, projections, reporting, things of that nature. And then moved on to another firm after that and just continued to do that sort of work. And so I got to know sort of finance, the accounting adjacent work, and just through that time, I realized that I had developed a pretty good skill set. And talking with some friends and people I knew in the startup space, they were sort of underwhelmed, if you will, by the accounting services that were available to them. So, I thought, well, I can take my skill set and apply it into this space, and maybe I can make some waves. And so, in 2017, I started a company. This is Calculate, and just sort of dove right into it. So started to find some clients and grow. And mostly, just to your question, I focused on doing a really good job for the clients and making sure they felt that, and then just kind of reinvesting back into the business. So like I mentioned, started it myself and then just sort of built it up over time. Within 6 months, had my first employee, and sort of just every time we were to the point where we were too busy, just added another really capable, smart person to the team. And over sort of a 6 year period, by the beginning of 2023, we were about 45 headcount. And so yeah, just really just focused on doing kind of the little things right, and the rest kind of fell into place there.
It's interesting. So, what I remember from our conversation about Calculate was that everything that is currently being taught as a template to grow was not something that you followed for Calculate. For example, right now the buzzword is to do away with billing templates and to have standardized packages. But when you grew and expanded Calculate, you had hourly billings and task-based billings. And despite that, you were able to achieve phenomenal numbers. So talk us through that how did that work out for you and how did you manage to keep the project scope intact?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes not without some friction and some difficulties, right? And I think there are a lot of firms that structure themselves as sort of very clear deliverables and very flat fee pricing. And I think that's good. I think my philosophy was one on sort of the other side, and there are a couple contributors to that. One is I was working with very high growth companies typically. And so to set up some sort of flat fee arrangement that was for a very clear scope, we would have been in a situation where every 6 or 8 or 12 months, we were sort of renegotiating that scope. And it just didn't feel like it was very conducive to that particular client. Also, with our client relationships, like we were very hands-on. Like it was very important to me, and one of our 10 business principles was to make our clients feel like we were part of their team. And so to do that, you have to be quite a bit more fluid. And so you're saying yes to a lot more things and sort of doing that. So we were very much a group that said yes Not yes for nothing, but yes when it made sense. But we were always willing and able to kind of expand scopes or take on more or some things that were sort of adjacent to the original role that we took on. And I think that's a contributor to our growth, both directly in the sense of every time a client grows or every time we said yes to something, we would generally make money since we charge mostly hourly. But then also, I think it goes back to just like trying to do the best job you can for your clients, and making sure that they feel it. So if we're working with a client and they're feeling really good about the work they're doing, they're going to want more of it, and or they're going to tell their friends and colleagues and other people they know. So those things definitely contribute to sort of the sort of top line success as well as just like the organizational success.
Awesome. And I think a large part that contributed to this was also something that you had mentioned before was that you hired mostly senior staff. So they were able to have that conversation with your clients. So they were able to build that relationship. So that would have probably helped you keep have more
Yeah,
fluid billing and still continue with that.
for
Uh,
sure. Yeah, that's a great reminder. I think my first four hires, all four of them had more experience, certainly more accounting experience, but just in general had more experience than me. So it was interesting to kind of run a company at early days. We were 5 headcount, but I was the most junior person at the company essentially. And I didn't hire my first kind of associate level person. I think she was our sixth employee, and so very much focused on that. And I think my philosophy was always like I didn't want to have to teach rigor. I didn't want to have to teach kind of how to handle people. So I typically hired people who came out of more disciplined environments, let's say ex Big Four, ex Big Bank, things like that, and typically hired people who had a level of experience. I didn't hire one person who was like straight out of college. Every person had who worked to calculate was generally someone who had a little bit of seasoned experience to them.
Which is also very contrary to what most people tell the standard template should be. Most people say that as a standard template, the first hire should always be an admin. But in your company, you wanted to make sure that there was no admin and that everybody was their own admin, which was an interesting work
Yeah,
culture to have.
we even when we were kind of humming, we never had like an administrative assistant. I always thought we were fully capable of scheduling our own meetings, and there's simple tools out there that can manage calendars and things like that. But certainly, yeah, I wanted people who were capable of doing the work fluidly, and even when we were say 45 people, I think we only had about 3.5 administrative headcount, and even that was probably across 4 people. So across 4 people, we were still getting a head count worth of like kind of revenue generating production out of us. So we ran a ship, I think, that was pretty light administratively, and sort of I feel like there was a culture that we were all capable of scheduling our meetings, and sort of no work was below any one individual.
That sounds awesome. But I think one question that I have on my mind is that since you were hiring people who were so senior, did that at any point impact your margins or did you have to take profitability hit?
Yeah, certainly. I think, and it comes in a couple different ways. I think the first handful of people were also interested in trying something different, and
Mm.
so being able to bring them in, they were willing to take, let's say, a pay cut for a different lifestyle, if you will, or a different opportunity to build something. And also that came with a little bit of equity. So the folks who did take a significant pay cut, they were rewarded in terms of some equity in the business as well. And so yeah, so I think there's elements to that for sure. I mean, I definitely didn't take a market salary, and some of the early employees weren't taking market salaries, which enabled us to sort of be profitable early, but also reinvest some of those profits back into the business and some of the growth. And so yeah, so I think like that was part of it. And you can't necessarily just find someone who applies to the job and the first resume is that. You need to talk with people and make sure that they can share a vision, and they're interested in building something. And I think ultimately you also build a better culture that way, when you're able to find someone who's aligned with you in that sort of sense. So I was very fortunate to find a handful of people who worked with me that were very much like sold into building something, and that vision alongside me.
That sounds amazing. Sounds like you had an amazing team.
Yeah, yeah, I was very fortunate.
So you had this amazing team, but what stands out from your history with Calculate was the phenomenal growth that the company had year over year. Like I think one of most years you were growing at about 200%, and your slowest year was 75% growth. So
Yeah, that's right. That's pretty right. I
walk
mean,
us
the
through.
200% was usually on like small numbers. But yeah, I think our slowest kind of year over year growth rate was 75%. Um, and yeah, I think it was a function of us working really hard. I think it was a function of us having a pretty effective sales process. It was like a really great sales engine that we had built. I think also there's elements of we were working with growing companies. So a company that might have paid us $2,000 a month last year might pay us $4,000 a month this year. So that was certainly helpful. There was a lot of, as they say, tailwinds in the market. More and more people were looking to kind of outsource or look for fractional support around the finances and accounting of their businesses. So certainly a multitude of different things. If I look back at it and I'm being critical, I would argue that we probably grew too quickly. I think sustaining that level of growth for a services business, especially one that didn't take outside funding,
Hmm.
can be challenging. And just if you do round numbers, if we're growing at 75% per year, and I factor in turnover, I'm roughly saying that 50% of my headcount has been at the company less than a year.
Hmm.
So it's tough to grow a business in that way, or it creates friction growing a business that way when you're looking at having limited institutional knowledge across your team, or getting people onboarded, getting used to the process and things of that nature, and also growing and adding new clients and a lot of that. So certainly a lot of moving parts. Certainly wasn't easy, but I think it's something that we can say we can hang our hat on or feel pretty proud about, that we were able to build a company in that way.
Interesting. I would love to touch on the topic of growing the team. But before that,
Yeah.
I want to probably delve a little more about the template that you had for growth. Uh, I generally a lot of people talk about accounting. Everybody valuing accounting more right now. So startups saw the value in the service that you added, and of course, your FP&A background gave that additional touch. So you were an advisor to them, in addition to just being just a finance function was more of an advisory function for them. So I think you're one of the few pioneers there. But what were your challenges while growing, and how did you speak to your audience, and what was your journey to find the right audience there?
Yeah, there's a couple questions in there. I think like around like finding the audience and nailing that down, I think like one was we were pretty intentional about the branding and things of that nature. So the company was called Calculate. It had a little bit more of a startup feel. It tried to appeal to those types of companies a little bit more. It was also in the way I described the business. I used to say that Calculate's clients usually had three things. They usually had ambitious founders and teams. They were usually thinking about their business in sort of national or international context, and they usually had some sort of sophistication in the numbers. So I was sort of making it clear in my messaging that we weren't working kind of with any business. We were working with sort of like this generation's leaders or builders. And so I think we did a good job of sort of carving out who we wanted to work with and also speaking to them in sort of their terms. So I'd say that's the first thing. I'd say the second thing is probably just like I go back to, like, just the best thing you can do is do a good job for your clients, because they're going to want more of you and they're going to tell their friends about you. And so that was really helpful for us building kind of like a sales engine,
Mm.
that plus just building like other relationships with other folks who are adjacent to the work that we're doing. So we're doing the accounting work, but we work closely with attorneys, and our clients do, right? Like creating relationships there where we can kind of get inflows and things to that nature. So our
Mm.
overwhelming new business structure was just referrals from existing clients or friends we have in the space and things to that nature. And so building it up that way is also effective because you spend a lot less time in the sales process. You may spend more time creating those relationships, but generally the sales process is more of a yes or no question, where if it's a referral, they're already clearly ready to buy. They've already considered us because we have an introduction. So it's really just about like, are we the right fit and can we make this structure work? And so then you're talking about like a close rate that's in the 50, 60+% range. And you're spending a lot less time sort of that. So those are all kind of like how we built it. Your question about what were sort of the challenges, difficulties, I think it can be chunky, right? Like that's not something you can necessarily predict. So we would have times where we'd have too much business and we'd have to turn it down. We'd have other times where like we felt like we couldn't find any new business for certain stretches there. So it's definitely less predictable. And I think some of the challenges like that works really well for the business that we had as we were building and sort of, going up and sort of above $1 million, but under $10 million in revenue. But I think if you're trying to run a $50 million business, relationship-based sales, unless it's sort of very diversified across the organization, is going to be a little bit difficult to kind of like fuel the engine, so to speak.
Mm. So most of your sales was relationship based. How big was your sales team?
It was me and I did it part-time. So I was the only person who was like really dedicated on sales, but it wasn't my full job. Sort of how we structured the business as we matured is I was sort of in charge of like revenue, if you want to call it that, which
Mhm.
was both sales and execution. And then I had another person who was in charge of more of like the people culture kind of operational side on that front. And so, yeah, so I focus on sales. Obviously, other people on the team did sales as part of their job, or if a referral would come in, they would take the call. But I primarily did the sales. And it was mostly just through like, me going to events, meeting new people, kind of creating those relationships that then would funnel into referrals and sales calls and things of that nature. So pretty light on there was no additional sales expense really. And we never spent any money on advertising or anything like that.
Wow. And having managed as much sales as you have, because I'm sure the volume was massive, going to about 10 million in 5 or 6 years, you would have handled larger accounts. So, what do you think worked, and what are the five things that absolutely don't work?
In terms of like building up through the business on sales specifically, or in general, kind of growing revenue.
On growing revenue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think like I think the two things that really helped us that were like not really in my control. One was intentional, but one has not. It's just like the space continued to get, the macro environment was good. The economy tended to be good during the time I was doing it. Also, more and more companies were recognizing the value of outsourced accounting, so they were moving into the space. So those are things that like that's not really in my control, but we certainly benefited from. So first tip is if you can be part of a robust economy that's growing, great, do that. That's the first thing. Second, I would say definitely we had clients that were growing. And so I had some clients that might have started with me with $2,000, $4,000 a month and grew into $25,000 a month clients, or ones that were $1,500 with us just doing one project and then it grew. I think there's also benefits in the sense that like we had multiple services, like we kind of had the whole span of services that someone could want. But we also would say yes if you just wanted this. So if you just wanted some tax work for us, we would take you on, and then maybe over time we could expand it. So sort of like that's very much of a philosophy for me is like, can we get on one small thing or start small, and then does that organically grow over time? And that worked well for us, and it's certainly contingent on doing a good job. I think the challenges around that, or what were sort of some of the things that were restrictive or difficult, like certainly in the later years, I think like recruiting always tended to be pretty good, but retention got more difficult. Like in the COVID time and post COVID, there was definitely a lot of like movement in the space. And so when someone leaves, they're also taking that institutional knowledge, they're taking those processes with them. And it's sometimes difficult to make sure you're able to like keep it up to a certain level. And so I think like if I'm critical, there were some elements that like could have been more fluid on that side during sort of a difficult time, but like we were growing quickly and having some of those market realities hit us. So that's certainly difficult. I also think that as you grow a business and get to a certain size, typically as you get close on a services business to that like $10 million mark, you certainly start to feel some of like the resource constraints, a little bit of like needing, more IT resources or HR resources or financial resources, things to that nature. And those can definitely have, those are decisions to be made as at like a strategic level as you're, trying to build in the next direction you go.
Mm. Interesting. So, since you were speaking about talent, can you touch a bit more upon what was your process of training people? And like you said, there were times when your team was growing by 50% in the year. So, of course, hiring would have been one part of the challenge, but also blending people into the work culture and making
Yeah.
sure that everybody had a homogeneous experience, your clients had a homogeneous experience would have also been a challenge. So, did you have templates, or how did you make sure
Yeah.
that your team was
Yeah,
structured?
great question. I would so just a brief thing on hiring, which is a part of this and kind of feeds into it, is like I would say that like hiring was never really an issue for us. I
Mm,
think we were able to carve out a couple things. I think one is we had a brand that was a little bit more interesting, and we spoke that brand to a lot of folks who were like experienced accountants. So for me, we were able to carve out this picture that was like a really appealing picture for someone who had spent some time at a big four. They worked at a big company like that. It was a rigorous environment, which we wanted, but
mm,
they weren't necessarily feeling fulfilled in their work. And so we can provide a way where they like you can use your accounting skills, but in a much more interesting and fulfilling way, and we were able to hire a lot of people using that sort of mentality. So hiring went very fluidly. On the onboarding stuff, I think is super important. And so we had basically the first kind of like 30 days that you joined, we had basically every other day like a training session. And that training session was hosted by a different person in the team. So you would get a chance to like understand a little bit more, whether it be a technical skill set that you're going to need or a soft skill that you're going to need for the work. And it was a different person every time. So you also got an opportunity to meet a different person from the team. So
mm,
over the course of the first 30 days, you met your team, but you also met an extra 15 people who worked at the company. So we thought that was pretty effective. Also, like over the time, we had different checkpoints. So there was always like a 30, 60, 90-day checkpoint as you're getting onboarded, and there's expectations around that. And there's also feedback for how that person had felt. And then I think that the third element is just like making sure that there's proper support in and around you when you started. So like never is a new person running an account by themselves or having to figure out something. Like they're coming onto a team that usually has a pretty good amount of foundation and footing, and that like they are clearly the new person, but
mm.
like they're surrounded by people who are experienced both in the work and in the company. So those are the things that I think we did. And I think we got pretty high marks from new hires on their experience getting onboarded and trying to make a good impression too. Like during the hiring process, we would have a screening, but the first real interview, I always made sure I was on that interview. So even when we were like, rolling as a business, and then also the first day, like I always made sure that I had an hour-long session that I got to meet whoever was starting on their first day, so that I can make a positive impression on them and make sure that they felt I was accessible, and sort of really make a differentiated kind of onboarding experience was important for us.
That's very cool. Um, so this is everything that went right. Were there days when you felt like shutting down the business?
There were a lot of those. I sort of jokingly say that if you like, have you really like worked on building a business if you haven't like cried over the sink at midnight, right? Like that's kind of the like, to me, that's like the identifier that you've actually like felt it. I think there's a lot of times where you're like, hey, am I doing this the right way? Is this really what I want? Especially like in a high growth company. Because
Mm,
like, especially services, like frankly, I could have paid myself personally more money over the time of building it, but I decided to grow it at top line. And I would always have sort of, hey, should I pay myself more money and like basically just build it as more of a value business rather than a growth business. And like value business has fewer issues and it's a little bit more controlled and things to that nature. So I think it's like I at least second guessed myself a lot and certainly had moments where it's like, am I right for this, or this is the I can't do this, or things of that nature. And it sort of culminated itself where I eventually got to the point where when we were like 40 closing in on 50 people, things were going pretty well. but I was like not convinced that I was the right person to continue to lead the business, particularly by myself. And so ended up running a process over the course of 2023 to explore that, which ended with me selling the business. So I think that, you know, to your point, all those doubts and concerns kind of culminated themselves in sort of the result of where we went with the business.
Mm. Interesting. I'd like to talk a bit more about that, if you don't mind, about
Yeah.
the journey that you had in your mind, because everything was working out really well. You had a good inflow of customers, you had a team capable enough of delivering, but despite that, you were mentally in a place where you wanted to sell the business, and you felt it was right for the business to be run by somebody else. So, as a founder, I'm sure it must have been a difficult decision, and it would have taken its course to build up till you got to the point where you actually started working towards that. So, can you walk us through what went in your mind and what were the triggers?
Yeah. I think that when the business was building over like whatever 10, 20, 30 head count, like I really really enjoyed that time. Like I had a lot of fun doing that. And I think what happened was the business and like working on the business was not fun for me anymore. And how I articulate that now is that I really enjoyed building the business, but I didn't necessarily enjoy operating the business. And I think as we kind of got past the 30 headcount mark, it changed. Obviously, it was building, but it changed from my primary focus wasn't like building a business, it was like operating a business. And so I just felt much less fulfilled by that. I didn't enjoy it as much. I jokingly say that I would wake up and my first thought was, what problem did I not create that I now have to solve? And so there was some truth buried in that, even though it's a joke, in the sense that like I was much more interested in like building and seizing the opportunity ahead of us rather than sort of like cleaning up the problems that that occurred yesterday, sort of thing. So I would say like that's kind of the psychology for me is that it stopped being fun. Why did it stop being fun? Because I felt like we weren't building. I felt like I was just operating.
Interesting. And then when you decided to sell your business, uh, what was the process like? Did you approach a lot of people, or were people already speaking with you to try and buy the company? And I'm sure a business that you had built from scratch, you would have had some vision and you would have filtered the buyer in a certain way. So, can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say like there were people over the years who had approached us and like interested in buying the company, but mostly didn't take those too seriously. Like I'd always take a conversation, but never really went anywhere. And then once we got to 2023 and I was like felt the way that I had just described, I definitely like kind of ran, what you call like running an M&A process. I did not hire a investment banker or anything like that. I felt that I had enough connections in the space that I could materialize something. And it went generally well. I think I reached out to about 30 organizations, both like strategic buyers, like bigger accounting firms, but also like financial buyers, PE firms, roll-ups, things like that. And I reached out to about 30 people. I got about 20 conversations, and those 20 conversations turned into about 10 offers. So obviously, like feeling very fortunate that we had built a business that was so appealing that basically 50% of the people we talked with were seriously interested in buying us. Now, like that doesn't mean every deal was a good deal, right? Like there were some deals that weren't worth really pursuing too much, but yeah, so basically ran the process myself, and just used my network and had conversations and tried to present ourselves in the most appropriate investor light that was reflective of the business.
If you were to give your old self some advice or some resources, what would that be?
I think that this is a good question. I haven't thought about this. I do think about it sometimes, but not so specifically. I would say that I think that my team and people who worked with me could have benefited from more like tough love, as we say. I think sometimes that I would have I would have really tried to like coddle, like maybe coddle too much or support too much someone when they really needed like kind of a more aggressive or a little bit more forceful support, if that makes sense. I had a conversation recently with someone and sort of I was like coaching them a little bit, and they were being, they were kind of focused on feeling maybe a little inadequate or maybe imposter syndrome or things like that nature, which is totally normal to feel that way and everything. But I remember saying to this person, like, no one cares about your feelings, and you shouldn't either. And like that, like that's a little bit harsh, but I think in a business context, if you're leading or driving something, that's something I think that's important to hear in the sense that like ultimately your job is to make the business work or not make it work. And sort of focusing too much sometimes on your personal identity in the context of the business can sometimes be a detriment. And I think ultimately not, you care about your feelings much more than other people do, but sometimes I think you just need to hear that or remind yourself. And maybe I could have done that a little bit more with the business, and like instead of being a little less soft sometimes probably could have been better.
I am
So
sure
yeah,
a
maybe
lot
that.
of people are guilty of that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like, I wanted to build a business that treated its people like humans, and I wanted to be liked, and I wanted people to like working there. And I think sometimes that comes to like, being overly supportive or being overly understanding. And sometimes the business doesn't, that's not benefit of the business, but also it's not necessarily the benefit of the person,
Mhm.
where they need to kind of hear some harder or harsher feedback sometimes to sort of achieve to the things that they want to achieve. Yeah.
So after this, once you had sold Calculate, instead of getting that beach house and sipping pina coladas, what made you get back into the game?
Yeah, I like this stuff. I like doing and building. I think, maybe to my earlier point, one thing I felt like I was losing out of Calculate is I wasn't felt like I was building anymore. So I think I was eager to build again. And I think I found a really great opportunity with Amalgam, which was a tool that we had built within Calculate. So we had built our own software within Calculate, and it worked really well for us to the point that we realized other people can benefit from that too. So in the middle of 22, we spun that out as its own business. I continued to run Calculate. One of our partners from Calculate, Ben, went on to run Amalgam full time. And so once I sold and left Calculate in 2024, eventually after that, I looked around at what sort of opportunities there are, and looked at Amalgam as an opportunity that like, hey, it's a really great product, but could use some help around marketing and sales and customer support. There was really no one leading the front of house. So I rejoined Ben at Amalgam and have been grinding on that. And like I get to, even though I'm not building an accounting firm, I get to talk to accountants all the time, and very much familiar with the space and the intersection of technology and things to that nature. So it's been really great. It's been about a year now. So we're recording this in kind of the middle of 25. It's been about a year now, which has been really, really rewarding for me and exciting to kind of be building again.
Awesome. So tell us about your new baby Amalgam.
Yeah.
How did you build it during Calculate? What was the need, and how has it changed over time? And how has it helped you? And how do you hope it helps other accountants?
Yeah. Well, the biggest use case for us was mostly we realized we were just spending too much time jockeying around these various systems and downloading CSVs that our clients are using. And so, you don't realize it, but let's say you're going to download a Stripe report, you've got to go, obviously go to login, get your credentials. Maybe there's a two-factor authentication you need to pull down, then you need to navigate to the report, download a CSV, copy that down, save it, all of those types of things. And said, why don't we just bridge that and get it right to the workbook? And so we're building with our workbooks, and we have our schedules and things of that nature. Really what I can do is pull my Stripe or Shopify or Gusto, whatever, Plaid data into one tab, manipulate that, edit that if I need to. And then my second tab, I can also send information to various systems. So in our instance, we were using a lot of QuickBooks, some NetSuite, things to that nature. But to be able to write journal entries or invoices or edit information to your GL, you're saving a tremendous amount of time of just all that like non-value added tinkering of like logging into QuickBooks, navigating to the journal entry, manually putting in the information, then saving it, then checking it. So all of that's able to be eliminated. And so, for us, the big value adds are whether it's an accounting team internally or it's an outsourced accounting team like Calculate was, to be able to produce financials, close the books, and sort of deliver to clients or deliver to management teams more quickly is all what it's about. And the real beauty of it is how simply it's been built. So it doesn't save any client data, so there's no exposure there. You're using your own credentials from the systems you already have to get access. It's built natively with Excel and Google Sheets, so it doesn't require any new learning. You're able to pick this up and get savings right away. So it's been a really valuable tool. It was for us at Calculate, and obviously all of the firms we're working with now. And it might be a one person at a controller or a 5-person accounting team, or we've got top 25 national public CPA firms that are paying customers. So we're able to kind of work across the spectrum and provide value to a whole set of people.
So our team has extensively used Amalgam, which is how we got connected. So I know it is a great tool, and I would like to know a little bit more about how the feedback from Amalgam has been generally in the market and with your other clients.
Yeah, I mean, we can use your team, for example. So one of your colleagues used it. It was really great. She was using it for an onboarding process, and she quoted a client 2 weeks to kind of do the rebuilding of the books. And she called me 2.5 days into that cycle and said she was done already. So, like, that's just exciting for me that we're able to kind of produce that level of results. And so, especially if you're billing on a flat fee basis or something like that, you're able to really make your team a lot more effective and increase profitability. So I think that's a great anecdote there. But we see them all across. I was dealing with a customer recently. They needed to rebuild a year's worth of journal entries for one of their clients. And it was a business that had a 10-line journal entry every day of the year for whatever they were doing. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was able to put this in one Excel sheet. We had the 3,600 lines, 10 lines a day, and he was able to load them in one shot with no errors. It went and was written right into there. So, we're able to, in those kind of ad hoc processes, we're able to save massive amounts of time. But then also on the kind of day-to-day processes where we've got another customer, they're about a 10-person firm, and so all 10 people are using it now. And they've been able to shorten the average close time for each of their clients. So they were sort of delivering financials around the 15th day of the month, and they've gotten that down to about the 7th day a month on average. So pretty significant savings for them too. So a lot across the board that we're able to have positive impacts.
That's amazing. Interesting. So now that you're selling a product and earlier you were selling a service, so let's talk a little bit about how the two business models have been different for you, and what do you think can scale faster? Do you think products are more scalable or services?
Oh, that's good. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't know. I'm humbled by this question in the sense that, like, I don't necessarily believe that I've figured out either sales cycle. I mean, I'm doing them, right? But I don't know if I feel confident to say that I've figured it out. But I'd say services, I think are easier to sell because they're usually a little bit more tangible in terms of how people think about them. Is like, okay, I understand that I'm going to hire an accountant to do this work in my business. Um, and so I think a little bit easier to sell. We also built like a pretty good referral cycle. So like it was, closing was a little bit easier for those kind of businesses. Also, if you can go on and kind of make yourself likable in a services sales, I think that goes a long way. So my general thought would be that the individual sales are easier for a services business. The scalability, I think, is a little bit higher with a software, let's say a products business. I think the scalability is there, but also creates a difficulty in the sales cycle is because you're usually asking something a little bit more of your buyer. So I'm selling a software. I'm going to show you how to use it, but ultimately you have to be the one who uses it. I'm not going to do it for you. Services, I do it for you. And a product, you're doing it yourself, but I'm just showing you. So it's just a little bit more of an obstacle, especially when you think about the accounting space, because accountants are generally process driven people. So I'm asking process driven people to change their process, right? Like that sounds very simply said, but more, emotionally and mentally difficult. So, that's what I'm kind of going up against every day. We don't really come across too many competitors where we're excluded out of a deal because someone is already using something that's competing. It's more of just like going up against that mindset and that sort of historical approach with accounting folks.
But now that AI has become more frequent in our daily lives, and aren't more accountants leaning more towards technology and solutions that are driven by technology? Or do you feel that accountants are still more habit driven towards older ways of functioning?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is it's a really wide array. I talk to some people who are very tech forward and they have a full tech stack
Mm,
and like specific processes set. I talk to other people who basically have no technology. Yes, they're using QuickBooks or Bill.com and things of that nature, but they have no enhancements in their own operations. So
mm,
it's fully a mix. And I'd say like where we're at right now is there's a lot of talk about different AI tools that are out there. I generally haven't seen anything that's doing any artificial intelligence tool that's actually delivering on numbers. Like the LLMs are really good and doing a lot of interesting things, but actually like manipulating numbers. And I think there's an inherent challenge that like our work in accounting is much more subjective than I think we actually believe. I think as accountants, we like to think of things as objective, but like, okay, let's say you and I go out for a coffee and we're talking about work. Is that a personal coffee? Is it a work coffee? Okay, if it's related to work, it's a business coffee. Well, is that business development because you're a potential customer? Or is that, is it continuing education because we learned a lot? Is it just a, regular T&E? So like that is a lot of subjectivity. And so how are we going to translate that is obviously a big question. So I think there's to summarize your question, there's really no single answer. I think I've seen people all across the different spaces of adopting technology, being averse to it. Some people just always are saying they're too busy, which is actually true. If you're too busy, you can't implement something new, but it doesn't necessarily move you forward and towards making like a better practice, a better business.
Uh, what is your vision with Amalgam?
I think continuing to kind of do more of the same. I think for us, the product is really great. We're just sort of nascent in the market. I think building awareness and getting the product in the hands of more people is something that we're focused on. And so continuing to build out our capabilities in terms of the systems we're connected to and what it can do, continuing to build out our customer base. And then I think longer term, though we're not necessarily billing ourselves as an AI product, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for availability of data and structured data that's relevant for teams. And so, let's say you built an AI, you've implemented or you've implemented an agent or something like that in your business. Well, where is it getting its data to do its work? How is that data formatted? I think Amalgam is well positioned to help make those connections, make that data available so those things can go and do their work. And so I think when we think about a phase two, I think we're very excited about AI in our business for what it can mean for us and sort of the data availability question that I think is one people tend to be overlooking right now.
Interesting. And have you taken funding for Amalgam, or is it a bootstrap startup?
Nope, we're bootstrap profitable business. And so obviously that comes with us always wanting more resources to build out other things and build out the business. But I think we're also really proud of the ability that we could say, hey, people are buying our product because they like it, and when we meet them, we make a good impression and being able to build it up that way.
Interesting. And have you taken any learnings from Calculate into Amalgam when you've been hiring your teams or structuring your teams?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think like I'm not an, like I mentioned before, I'm not an accountant by trade or schooling, and I am, I guess, a little bit. My brain works a little bit differently than most accountants, and so I think taking kind of the learnings of managing a team, and then over the course of last year, spent a lot of time like reading some books about psychology and organizational psychology and sort of behavior have been really helpful to sort of think about both in my sale process and sort of how am I approaching accountants when I'm selling this, like what are the things that drive them, and then also to your question about building our team. So we're mostly, we're not necessarily hiring accountants, we have developers and things of that nature, but when we think about building our team, I think this is very much relevant of like we have to have sort of similar mindsets and be able to see the world in sort of similar ways so that we can develop the kind of most relevant product we can for our customer base.
Interesting. And across the two companies that you've had, you've never considered a global team. You've never gone to hire outside of the US. So, what were some of the qualms that you had while hiring outside the country?
Yeah. So considered, yes, we have considered. So Calculate was pretty much 100% onshore team in the United States. I That was for two reasons. One is we were growing really quickly, and I needed to kind of like having an employee means you kind of own their full time and sort of that sort of thing. So I think like having that more like linear commitment and full commitment from people was really important building that. But very much considered looking offshore. I think at that time at Calculate, I didn't really have the connections or really the network to really build an offshore team, and I was very concerned that I would attempt to do it and sort of it would fail. Basically, it would be a very expensive thing, and I think it's very difficult. And I think a lot of companies understate that. And I had had enough experience in my other jobs that I realized there were that I had seen that happen enough where people tried, arrogant Americans basically tried to build overseas teams and it didn't go so well and it was either very expensive or didn't pan out. So I was never comfortable enough to take that chance given, I didn't have partners like you guys or things of that nature. So that's the Calculate side. And then Amalgam, we do utilize overseas resources for development and other elements too. So we have a global team with Amalgam. We're a fully remote business. I think that tends to work a little bit better in sort of software products businesses than it does in services. One thing I think we struggled with is trying to build a services business very quickly that was remote. But I think for a products business like Amalgam, where we've got more defined roles and tend to be a little bit more siloed in our work, it works. It tends to work pretty well building a global business.
Interesting. Which are the countries that you have a team in?
Yeah, so we've got folks in Argentina and Brazil and Spain. So those places, also the Philippines, South Africa. We've had some resources as well. So pretty spread out across the globe.
Interesting. How are you managing payroll for them? Are they employees on regular?
I don't know exactly the details of that. I'll have to ask my partner, Ben, that question because he manages that side of the business. I'm fortunate in that this iteration of entrepreneurship, I'm dealing a little less with those administrative duties than I had been previously.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, so coming back to your side of the business,
Yeah.
what you said you were reading a lot more about psychology to be able to better market to clients, to understand them better. What are the three books that you would recommend to all entrepreneurs who would want to grow their business right?
Okay. The ones that I've read recently, two are kind of related. Uh, but I think Thinking Fast and Slow is really good, really, really good book. I think the author of that won the Nobel Prize in economics. So very smart people worked on that book. Another book adjacent to that is Predictably Irrational, which is really about like we have certain tendencies that we would assume are true, but aren't necessarily true. Like humans act in ways that seem irrational from an analysis standpoint, but you can predict it if you think about it well enough. And then the third one is I don't love the title because it's translated I think from Swedish or Finnish, but it's called Surrounded by Idiots, which is really uses different personality types in the workplace, so you can kind of identify different personality types more easily and then kind of cater to them in a way that's going to make you more effective at the workplace. So that's an effective one I think too. So those would be my three books.
Amazing. I love the title.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little, the book is much less aggressive than the title implies, but the sort of idea is that, like, who are all these idiots I'm surrounded by with work? They're not idiots. They have just different personality types than you.
Amazing. Okay. Uh, so no other questions from me. Thank you so much for your time, Joe. It was amazing learning from you about both Calculate and Amalgam. I'm sure we'll have you back on in some time to share more of your insights about developing
Yeah.
services and products.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. This is a lot of fun for me to share these things, and hopefully some other folks who are listening can benefit from them. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.